Hey guys, this is Dawood with AutoMarketplace. A lot going on in the industry right now, and we thought it would be a good time to make a video, especially, and we'll go over this if you have no idea what we're talking about, but there is basically the exemption to the new EV TLC plates, i.e. FHV licenses, otherwise known as FHV licenses, goes into effect while a lawsuit goes on at 9 a.m. tomorrow. So let's get right into it. So we've been covering this very actively on our newsletter, and everything we speak about here, all the links will be included in the description below. And we're going to try to keep this as short as possible. But honestly, there's so much going on and it's so consequential that this might be 30 or 40 minutes. But we'll make a table of contents. And so you can skip around. So it's easier for you in the YouTube. You can, it'll be easier to skip around the video. And then after this introduction, we're actually going to attach our 1 hour podcast with our friends at NYC Taxi News. That podcast is already on our site. It's also on nyctaxinews.com. And that was recorded on November 4th. We thought that gained a lot of traction. We thought it was a really good discussion. It was between myself, Abe Mittleman, Carolyn Protz, Nancy Reynoso. And we spoke about why the decision, the surprise decision to reinstitute the EV exemption was so controversial and its impact on the yellow cab industry. Which, all of us thought was quite significant. And so let's get into this. Let's get into the background of what's going on. And I know many of you may know this, but I think it's important just to, give the facts and the correct background. Okay. So the original the original FHV license pause, for hire vehicle license pause, which is very often known as the TLC Plate Cap, that came into effect in August 2018. However, very important, there was a wheelchair accessible vehicle exemption, which still remains to this day. And there was actually an electric vehicle exemption. But back in 2018, electric vehicles, there was pretty much no charging back then. And also that was more like a luxury purchase, the Tesla Model S or, more expensive vehicles that, most TLC drivers are not going to buy. So it wasn't that interesting at that time, and it also wasn't that controversial to put that EV exemption. When the exemption was revoked, people must remember the background to that. So it was in kind of year 2 of the pandemic. New York City was still recovering from that pandemic. And so the exemption remained as long with the wheelchair accessible vehicle exemption. But the reason it remained was that it was meant for individual drivers who wanted to make get out of a leasing arrangement. Let's say they could buy an electric vehicle. It was not really meant at all for fleets or businesses to kind of use that exemption as a loophole to add thousands of vehicles that defeated the purpose of the original FHV license pause, the TLC Plate Cap. And the original purpose was, back then, if you go back to 2018, there was a lot of, unfortunately, there's just, 2,000 for-hire vehicles were flooding the market. The yellow cab industry was dying. Driver suicides were occurring. It was chaotic. And so that's why the TLC Plate Cap originally came about. So that's the background. So obviously, the EV exemption was for individual drivers. It was not meant for fleets or companies to add cars. So then Revel announced that they were launching, at that time, they were a kind of a moped company, very well known in New York City. And they were going to announce an EV rideshare service. But what was different versus Uber and Lyft was they were going to own the cars and employ the drivers. So, they would actually be buying the cars. TLC, to its credit, at that time, the chair was, and excuse me if I'm pronouncing this incorrectly, Aloisi Heredia Jarmasuk. They saw the writing on the wall. They said, okay, we're not going to let this happen. These guys might add hundreds, if not thousands of cars. So very quickly, in June of 2021, they voted to remove the exemption to prevent that. Also, trips were way down. So that was also, uncontroversial, relatively uncontroversial. The people who didn't like it, and understandably so, was Revel, because that stopped that way of growth in its track. But, honestly, there'd be a lot of cars on the street. So, for most other industry participants, it was not a controversial decision. Okay. So then let's kind of jump to present time, October 18th. So on October 18th, and we've spoken, there's basically the not surprising part of October 18th was there was a vote on the Green Rides Initiative, and we've spoken about this before at length. And so, you can see it on our YouTube channel. And so basically, we even cut clips from that hearing on the Green Rides Initiative. And with the Green Rides Initiative, it was also very controversial at that time. But there was a debate to be had, and the TLC allowed that debate, to be fair. And we also did about a month ago, our NYC Uber and Lyft drivers ready for EVs. So we've covered the Green Rides Initiative. And so what the Green Rides Initiative was kind of this gradual plan to fully electrify the vehicle fleet by 2030 in increments. If you think about the number of TLC plates and the infrastructure in New York City, it's not like any other cities. Most people don't have a garage, they street park, so the charging infrastructure really doesn't exist here in a way that it might exist in other places where people have garages and can just easily install that. That was in and of itself a controversial thing, but there was a discussion was had. So that was had. So they approved the Green Rides Initiative without really reflecting the commentary, to be frank. But that is what it is. Sometimes that's how it works. What was surprising and was a total shock and was never discussed, ever by the TLC, was their plan to reinstitute that exemption where anybody can get an EV, buy a new EV car and get a TLC plate. And what was additionally controversial is it wasn't only for individual drivers, it was for any company or any fleet. And, this was who was at the conference, which, we felt, we've been very critical of this decision. But, if you look at the, and all these links again, we're going to provide, Revel was at that conference call, which is just totally inappropriate for them to be at that conference call. And I'm not even sure why they would want to attend that conference call or why they were invited to that conference call. And there was no drivers, no one else knew, but that was a decision they made. It is extremely controversial. Many people are upset, but there was this class of people who are in leasing arrangements who are like, this is amazing. Now we can buy our own cars and get out of leasing arrangements. And so that actually is legitimate. But there were different ways to approach that, which we've talked about. And so in any case, and we're going to get into that very, very soon. So in any case, we broke the news, reported it. Drivers that buy an EV can get a TLC plate. And the way they announced it also is really weird. So the TLC has, since the 2018 TLC Plate Cap, the TLC has to publish this twice a year report. One time in February, one time in August. I think it's changed now to once a year, one time in February. So they published the February 2023 report at the time of the announcement on October 18th or 19th. So that like way past the deadline. And it says effective immediately, applicants can apply for new EV only FHV licenses, TLC plates through the standard EV application process. So you'd have to buy it in an EV and you can apply to get your own plate. So that was that. And to be clear, just so for the record, we gave the advice that a practical suggestion is anyone who wants to apply for a new EV only FHV license should do so immediately. And we thought the cap may be removed soon, not because of a lawsuit, which we'll get into, but just because the amount of new applications and maybe there'd be an EV wave vehicle. So then you would remove the EV incentive and promote wave, because that's actually another angle of this, which we won't talk about at great length here. And so we report on that. And so now, and this is really what the podcast is about, and we'll put it, like we said, it's on our website, it's on nyctaxinews.com, but we'll put it as an attachment after this 30 to 40 minute kind of discussion. We'll try to even keep it shorter than that. I'll try my best. We wrote this article on October 25th, Dawood Taxi Drop Dead. And so this is actually, if you don't know the history of it, there's a very famous New York Daily News headline, Ford to City. Gerald Ford, the former US president, drop dead. So it's Ford to City drop dead. So it's kind of a play on that headline. And so this announcement was very, very consequential to the yellow cab industry specifically, because that industry had gone through a major debt restructuring. It still wasn't recovered from the pandemic. And so we had been covering that industry in our YouTube channel. We had been covering a recent an auction that occurred. And, you know, we have done other articles about that. And so let me get back to the article. And so we made this statement, and again, it's our opinion, it's not financial advice, but we're tracking the medallion industry so close that we thought that if this decision lasted for too long, that it would actually effectively crash the medallion price, not to zero, to be clear, but to crash the medallion price 40 to 50% from where it's currently at, which was before this announcement, 130,000, 110 to 130,000, depending on the type of medallion, whether it's a wheelchair medallion, wheelchair accessible vehicle medallion or not. And if you got it financed, it was like 170, 180, 160, that level. So we're not saying it's crashing to zero, but it's crashing significantly. So this was the financial logic. There's two main elements of this. It's our opinion again. A lot of people might disagree, but this was our opinion on why we thought that would occur, why that was quietly occurring. It's an illiquid market. It's not like the stock market where, you know, an announcement is made and then the market reflects it immediately. It's a private illiquid market. So, you know, you're not going to see the real impact for a few months, you know, after an announcement. So the way we deduce that, the first logic, the financial logic of it is that a driver can buy a taxi medallion right now for, let's say, 130 cash or 175 finance. So that's a 170 to 250 $250,000 investment. So that was before this announcement. A second option is there still was a waive exemption, so they could make a 60 or 70,000 plus investment in that. And why that wasn't controversial is because, number one, you know, there's a goal the city has to reach to get that, you know, to dispatch rides to that community, you know, the accessibility community, which is an important goal for the city, and it's an important thing in general. But if you know this industry, many drivers don't like driving those vans because they're very rough riding vans. Some drivers prefer not to get dispatched for that type of work. So that wasn't that controversial that exemption existed. However, if you add an electric vehicle exemption, this also impacts people buying waves, by the way, because instead of buying a wave, they'll just buy an EV. So that's why the accessibility advocates, as we had in our YouTube videos, the clips from that hearing were upset because they're like, what are you doing? If you give an EV exemption, no one's going to buy a wheelchair accessible vehicle. So that was a whole nother angle to this. But in any case, if there's a third option where a driver can buy a $40,000 to $60,000 EV, like a Tesla or GM Bolt or a Hyundai or a Kia, like under, you know, you're just kind of crushing a potential buyer's market, driver buyer market for the medallion, because they're just going to buy most likely an EV and attach a TLC plate to it because it's just so much cheaper and the driver earnings potential is about the same. So why would they spend that, you know, this amount of money versus this amount of money? So that was one reason we thought this impacted medallion values. And the second reason we thought about it is there were over 4,500, there still are, I should say, currently over 4,500 taxi medallions that are not active. So I'll put it this way. A good way to financially think about that, the logic, is let's say if I got hold of those 4,500 tax medallions and I gave it to brokers and I said, okay, what's the clearing price of all these medallions? Think about it that way. That's the actual true value. What do medallions, when all the medallions are active, what is the clearing price? And so that's why I thought this was such a drastic thing for the medallion industry. It was also kind of a betrayal, in my opinion, again. I don't own a taxi medallion, by the way. I'm not conflicted in that way. But I do think New York City needs a healthy yellow cab industry. I think there's an element of fairness to this, given a debt restructuring occurred, and, you know, the background to what happened to the yellow cab industry. in multiple ways, and we get into that on the podcast, so I won't go on too long about it here. But and then there was a city council hearing just a few days before that kind of confirmed that the medallion industry was also still in distress. 16% of tax medallion loans are more than, this is the TLC's testimony just a few days before. So just highly confusing why they didn't think about the yellow cab industry when they made this decision. And anybody who's reading our articles, and we'll get more into that in the podcast, we thought this decision was so drastic and so inappropriate in the way they implemented it. And we're going to talk about that predatory leasing issue coming up. But the way this was implemented and the implication of the yellow cab industry, we think, there has to be consequences in terms of resignations and political consequences related to this. And we had called for the chairman of the TLC to resign, and you can listen to our podcast for a more fulsome discussion around that. We also mentioned that there was this Office of Financial Stability that was supposed to make medallion reports, and it doesn't seem to have made any reports, so that's kind of confusing. And then there's, we've been talking about this for a long time. There's a city loan guarantee of $170K on each medallion. So if you crush the value of the medallion, then this policy also doesn't make any sense. In any case, we get more into that discussion in the podcast. So let's move on. So on October 2017, obviously now, although we disagree with the policy, drivers are buying EVs, drivers are interested in content about what's going on. So, we have to, write content for that, audience, which is important. So a big issue that came up where there was no insurance company that was providing comp and collision insurance for Teslas, obviously the most popular electric vehicle in America and also most popular electric vehicle in the TLC industry based on data. And so basically in this article, and again, we'll provide all the links, what we go over is a lot of people don't know the technicalities of how people actually buy cars in the TLC industry. And so how people buy cars. So like if you go to Tesla and you say, I want a car for the New York City to drive, New York City TLC, they're not going to approve you for the loan. They're just not going to do that. They're going to void the warranty, the battery warranty, because it's a commercial use and the bank is not underwriting that. So what they often do, a TLC driver, they'll basically buy a car under the pretense that it's just for normal use, like regular use, non-commercial use. And then they'll show the normal insurance, State Farm, Progressive, Geico, etc. insurance that has the comp and collision. The dealer, the dealer won't be none the wiser. The auto loan provider will be none the wiser. They'll just think it's a standard sale. That'll happen almost immediately after that. The driver will cancel their regular insurance. They'll get TLC liability only insurance. Some of them will get comp and collision, but many don't. And if you have a loan, technically in almost every single financial contract, you need comp and collision, but people roll the dice. Obviously with EVs, it's a very dangerous dice to roll. If someone hits your EV, that could total the car. And we write an article that kind of backs that claim, and we've also spoken about it before. So this dynamic was going on. And so we spoke about that there was no comp and collision insurance available for Teslas, which is the most popular EV. We've spoken about this subject in the past before. And so basically we spoke about that. And so then there was this company, Transit General, that I understand that they already stopped doing policies, EV policies. A new company, Adriatic, they're not a new company to the TLC industry, but Adriatic, another comp and collision insurance company, I hear has a new product, but the deductible is like $5,000 and glass is not included. So it's kind of like, it's not real insurance, but it is insurance. So, and also an auto lender is not looking for a $5,000 deductible insurance. They want to see a $1,000 deductible insurance. So this was the market share, just to kind of show that the data showed that obviously Teslas, this shouldn't surprise anybody. It's the most popular car in the TLC industry. So we wrote an article about that. Then on October 30th, again, we're disagreeing with the policy, but the policy is the policy. And we're making content, for the audience, to keep them up to date. They're buying electric vehicles. We want to make sure that, they're aware of what's going on and, try to help them navigate this. So on October 30th, the TLC basically, this is public. So, they've named the guy, I'm sure, nice enough guy, but this is all public. So we did this article that confirmed that the first TLC EV only TLC plate under the Green Rides initiative was issued. And the point we made here was that this car looks like a red Tesla Model Y. And even if it was a Tesla Model 3, the point would be the same. But especially for a Model Y, which many people get because of Uber Black, that we made the point that, anybody who's doing NYC TLC, they should get a black on black car, especially if you're trying to do Uber Black. And so he can wrap the car, so it's not the end of the world, but obviously wrapping the cars might cost a few more $1,000. So we made the point in that article. We also done a video on the Uber Black industry. So that was that. Now, this article we did on November 1st was kind of showing more data on the TLC fleet hitting 100,000 again. And so in the Black Car News, basically, in a Commissioner's Corner, an article the TLC chair writes, this is his words, again, not our words. He says, some have predicted that this will create a flood of new vehicles on our roads, exacerbating congestion. He's referring to reinstituting the EV exemption. I don't believe that to be the case. We saw no such flood when the same exemption existed back in 2021. And given the city's limited charging infrastructure, most TLC drivers will wait. So we made, the obvious point that there was a pandemic in 2020 and 21, so people are handing in their plates. No one was thinking about buying an EV, so that's kind of a confusing statement. And the reason it was removed was not the fear of individual drivers, and obviously the selection of EVs at that time was much less. The cost and everything of EVs has drastically changed over the past few years. So just a very weak statement in our opinion, but it is what it is. He's the TLC chair. He makes the policy. So what we wanted to do is we wanted to actually provide the data of this, because people have opinions. I'll have my opinions, good or bad. We can go all day with that, but the data is the data. So when is the last time there was 100,000 TLC plated vehicles X taxi medallion? So that happened in 2017, preceding just a year before the city council and the mayor said, there are too many cars. So just think about that. At 100,000 back then, when there were more trips, which we'll show below, they're already beginning to realize that there are probably too many cars on the street. What is interesting about this is a reminder is that although the cap was announced in 2018, a lot of people who weren't there might be like, well, why were 10,000 added? The TLC gave everybody a 2 weeks heads up on the cap. So that caused a very infamous rush, which caused the spike. And basically, by February 2019, there was over 120,000. It's peaked at about 120, 121,000, maybe 122,000. This is what a lot of people forget. We're tracking the data very actively during this time. There was a natural, this is all before the pandemic. It went from 120,000, 121,000-ish to about 114,000. And this was a proxy, meaning like it's a metric to measure natural attrition, meaning that what was the vehicle oversupply? There was a driver minimum wage law that forced Uber to create this thing called a planner, which we've spoken about, and left a planner. So there's just too many vehicles. And so people forget this, that 6,000 TLC plates naturally fell off. So the real number you want to use pre-pandemic is actually 114,000. It's not 120,000 or 120, it's 114,000. That's the honest, intellectually honest number to use. Pandemic happened, everything plummets. I mean, what can you even say about what happened during that time in the industry? Trip demand just, plummeted. Then in June 2021, there's an EV exemption, not to prevent individual drivers because of Revel. Very important context. There's a fear about the business adding. hundreds of cars, not drivers adding, hundreds or thousands of cars. But then from that bottom in 2021, and we're going to layer on trip demand because you just can't talk about supply. It's gone from a bottom of like 93,000-ish to now we're back at 100,000. The reason that happened, how it got back to 100,000, was you could store the plates during this time. So you didn't lose some TLC plates. So some people took their plates out of storage. A wheelchair exemption always existed, so that happened. And then in March, as we covered, 1,000 new EV-only TLC. That itself was controversial, but, it wasn't as controversial. So 1,000 new EV TLC plates were released. So that increases supply back to 100,000. This is 100,000 basically before this new reinstatement. Okay, so now, and we'll spend, this is just data, which I think is so important in our industry, in the TLC industry, to just talk about numbers sometimes. A lot of people have opinions. Let's talk numbers. Let's talk data. Okay, we're going to use 3 dates. There's September 2017, there's February 2020 pre-pandemic, and then there's August 23, which was basically the latest trip data. So we're using the vehicle supply data. We have to correlate it to the latest trip data that's available, which is August 2023. Then you have the active yellow cabs, and then basically you add the two, you have the number of active for-hire vehicles, and then we're going to layer on the trip demand. Okay, so in September 2017, you have, let's call it roughly, you break that 100,000 for the first time. Pre-pandemic, you have 114,000. You have these number of yellow cabs. Obviously, that industry was in distress. There's about 13,500, a little more than 13,500 yellow cab medallions ever issued. So somewhere on the sideline in distress, but the large chunk of them were active. And anybody in the industry knew that, the yellow cab industry was beginning with the TLC Plate Cap in 2018. It was beginning to the decline was beginning to level out. It was beginning to stabilize pre-pandemic. So in any case, so the FHV supply is down 13% from pre-pandemic 114,000 to 99,000 by August 2023. Obviously, there's 100,000 now, and it was down about 1% from September 2017, the last time we naturally had 100,000. But the yellow cab industry is obviously still way down. And we're going to obviously layer trip demand to this. So the yellow cab supply is down 27% versus pre-pandemic, and 34% since the first, September 2017 when it first hit 100,000. But these are the real for-hire vehicle supply numbers we really got to use. So there was in September 2017, there's about 113,000. In February 2020, just before the pandemic happened, there's about 125,000, and right now we're at 107,000. In reality, probably 108,000 or 109,000 now. But so we're 5% down since the last time, since September 2017, because you have to remember we're adding FHVs plus active yellow cabs. So we're not that much down from September 2017 levels, but we're obviously way down from the pandemic. So if you just look at vehicle supply, and what the TLC is doing is they're saying, look, we're way down from the pandemic. We can add more cars because so many cars went offline. Obviously, it goes without saying, you have to add to the supply, you have to add demand. Just speaking about vehicle supply without layering on the trip demand that the supply can service is just incomplete analysis. So we did that analysis. Again, September, February 2020, just before the pandemic, and August 2023, which is the latest data we have. So in the high volume sector, which is mostly Uber and Lyft, obviously in 2017, I think the data includes Via and Juno, but Uber and Lyft have the large chunk of the share, and they're the only high volume bases that exist now. So in September 2017, when we first reached the 100,000, there was 468,000. Then pre-pandemic, there was about 750,000. And in August 23, in modern times, there's about 590,000. So it's up 26% from the last time we hit 100,000. but you have to layer on all the other sectors, especially the yellow cab sector, but also, the green cab sector, the non-Uber and Lyft black car bases. I mean, they still haven't recovered. So, I mean, the numbers just speak for themselves. The trip volume is way down. So in the yellow cab sector, from that September 2017 benchmark, when it was almost 300,000 trips a day, they're still down 70%. Even from pre-pandemic, they're down 58%. So there's long road to recovery. And look at the green cab sector. Look at, this is still a little less than 50% down in the other black car sector. So this is actually what the trip number you want to analyze. So in 2017, when you add up all the trips across the sectors, there's about 875,000 trips to go around for the vehicle supply. Pre-pandemic, there was a little more than 1 million trips. Right now, we're at 730,000 trips. So versus September 2017, the first time we hit 100,000 FHVs, the trip demand is 17% less. Just think about the point we're making. Although the vehicle supply is down from pre-pandemic, the trip demand has to be layered onto that. Anyways, you get the point. So this is the metric, number of trips per New York City for hire vehicle. So in September 2017, it was 5.4 trips per non-yellow cab vehicle, you could say. Just pre-pandemic, it was 7.1 trips per for hire vehicle, and then 6.4 trips per hire vehicle. So then you could even make, if you're not like doing a complete analysis, if you just look at that Uber and Lyft sector and the black car industry, you could say, well, versus September 2017, it's 18% up, so we can add more cars. But that's just, look at these numbers. This is totally ignoring what's going on here. So yellow cab trips, and by the way, what's additionally, you have to layer onto this that there's 4,500 yellow cab medallions that are in storage. So if you added 4,500 yellow cabs, this 10.8 is going to even go more down. So this is just collapsing, and this is not recovered. So if you add, if you do it for all for hire vehicles, non-medallion trips and medallion trips, there was 7.5 in September 2017, the first time we hit 100,000, and there were more yellow cabs on the road. And then there was 8.2 pre-pandemic, but it's 6.8 now. So we're still down from the first time we hit that, and we're way down from the pre-pandemic. So the data is just screaming not to add more vehicles, and that's just the data. Like, this is just very simplistic, easy to understand analysis. However, I do want to, so that was kind of, and we'll provide the links to all of this. Okay. Then we did our podcast on November 4th to speak about why the yellow cab industry was so upset. That was with NYC Taxi News. You can find the podcast at nyctaxinews.com as well. And we'll also attach the podcast after this intro. Okay. So now we get to the lawsuit. And before we get into that, actually, let's talk about the leasing companies and a lot of driver. And we've spoken about this before, so this is not a new talk. It's not like something we haven't covered. We also did an article. You can see it on the quote unquote rental mafia. There's these big leasing companies, and this is a major talking point about predatory leasing. So in this article, we kind of address this head on, this talking point. And so the first obvious criticism of the reinstatement of the EV exemption is if you just made it for drivers who are leasing, and we had a discussion and all of that stuff, that is even like, okay, you're going to add more vehicles, but maybe you won't net add vehicles because a renter is returning a car, so a net new car is not added. But then that's missing the fact that there's 170,000 TLC licensed drivers, so that someone else is just going to rent the car. So you're still going to add more cars because there's many more license holders than there are vehicles. But in any case, I think everybody can agree to allowing companies like Revel and Hertz to add more TLC plates is not doing anything for the predatory leasing issue, what they call predatory leasing. So what we said that there were different ways to address that issue, which we get. And we've spoken about this at great length for several years since we launched the publication in 2020. One was lease caps. And what lease caps are, this is not even a new concept. They've done this for the yellow cab industry. They held a hearing, they got into the math of leasing, what things cost, and then they said, okay, if you're charging $1,000 or $700 or even $600 per week for a 2015 busted up Camry, like that's kind of predatory. You can quantify that, but that also doesn't even feel right. Right. At the same time, if someone's paying $550 for a 2023 Camry, and by the way, this includes everything, the maintenance, the insurance, everything. If you're charging $550 a week for that, I think the math shows that that's actually not that predatory if it's like a new car and it's working. But there's a discussion to be had, and there should be lease caps given. If you have a TLC plate cap, that can be abused, just like if you have a limited number of medallions, that can be abused. So we've written about this at length before this announcement that there should be a lease cap. And other people also, including the Taxi Workers Alliance, have spoken about the need for a lease cap to prevent abuse. The other thing we spoke about is that just like we showed in this article about the 100,000, there's now, plates sometimes are handed in. So the other way to address that issue of a driver being stuck or wanting to own their plate, even if they're not stuck in a predatory lease, like the lease is fair, but they just want to get a claim to their own FHV license. Another mechanism to do that, and we've spoken about this, is if an individual or a fleet or whoever hands in a TLC plate, you can make some sort of waiting list based on seniority, based on a statement, and say, okay, when a TLC plate is handed in, that individual onlys, don't let the fleets touch it. Don't let companies touch this, just for individual drivers. They can get those plates reissued. This is less controversial because you're not adding more cars. So there are two ways to solve this quote unquote predatory leasing issues. There's lease caps, there's reissuance of handed in medallions. For the TLC to propose that this is the only way, this is just like this is not a correct argument. There's multiple ways to address that. In any case, we want to mention that. Another point to make on the predatory leasing is if let's say you can regulate predatory, the TLC can regulate a leasing company in the TLC industry. They have that ability, like they've done with the taxi medallion industry. The TLC does not have the ability, unless they mistakenly think they have the ability, to regulate banks and financial institutions. So you can go from predatory leasing to then you get predatory lending. And predatory lending is probably worse because those are long-term contracts. With leasing, you can at least return the car quite quickly, and the TLC can protect you. So we're not saying that everybody's getting a 24% interest rate loan, but this is like a real image. But interest rates on auto loans, everybody knows they're way up. They're 8-10% plus. So, I'm not saying that's predatory. That, obviously if the benchmark interest rate is up to 5-ish% now, everything's going to get re-rated. But this is a real life example of why, the TLC thinks it's solving for predatory leasing, and then look at what this individual has entered. So this Tesla, it's a 2020 Tesla Model Y. He didn't buy it for the worst price. I mean, you can get a better deal, but it's not the worst price. He bought it for like $50,000. He put $4,000 down, but then he got like a credit card interest rate on his auto loan. And when you get that high of an interest rate on your auto loan, he's going to make a $1,200 monthly vehicle payment. Then you're going to get about $300 or $400 liability insurance. Then if you can get full coverage, it might not even be available, but if you can somehow get it, that's an additional, let's call it $200 to $300. It's a lot for, someone to handle, especially if something happens, if you get, it's just like, and that it's a long, it's a 6-year contract he's in. What if Uber deactivates him, let's say, or something like that? Then he's stuck in that. So the driver and this is just on this real life, this is a real life example. He's going to pay for this $50,000 car. He's going to pay $42,000 in interest. So if we're talking about predatory, I mean, that's screaming predatory to me. But again, I just want to be blunt about this. Everybody has a different credit score. So the bank can also reject that person for a loan. So then he can't even buy the car at all. But if someone has a 500 or 550 credit score and the bank says, okay, you know what, if you want an auto loan, you're going to have to pay us 25%. So, like the concept of predatory is like, it's like there's good people with good credit, there's people with bad credit, and you have to layer all of this in. So it's a much more complex issue than just simply, it's predatory. It's almost like saying everybody has the same credit score. That's not the case. But as we said, lease caps redistributing handed in TLC plates to only individual drivers was another way to solve that issue about people in leases, predatory or otherwise, who just want their own FHV license. So then we spoke about these Hertz articles that came out that, Hertz had announced an agreement with the city. They were teaming up with Revel and Uber. We've gone over that, at least initially, there was early signs of indications of that. And so this was a very recent article in CNBC and in another publication called The Verge based on Hertz public disclosures. And there are 2 points here that we want to make. One is, and this actually relates to the comp and collision point, it's a more technical point, but it's important to understand the technicalities. Because in this business, the car and understanding these technicalities, this is how we run our business. This is how people, I should say, run their business. Drivers run their business. Leasing companies run their business. They have to understand depreciation and financing and, insurance and all of these things. It's just fundamental. So what the CEO said is, MSRP manufacturers suggested retail price declines in EVs over the course of 2023, driven primarily by Tesla, have driven the fair market value of our EVs lower as compared to last year, such that the salvage creates a larger loss and therefore greater burden. So what this means is basically, let's say you get into an accident. The way that an insurance company usually determines, like when the claims adjuster comes, is they basically say that, okay, if a car's value is X, if the cost to repair it is, let's say, more than 50 or 60%, we're going to total the car. So what the point he's making is that the cost of the EVs, the depreciation has accelerated such to the point that, and it's also expensive to repair the cars. So if a Chevy Bolt is now valued at $25,000 and a fender bender dented the battery holder or something, and it's like a $16,000 replacement cost for that, they're just going to total the car. So that's expensive. Then there's, other commentary here. And this is another interesting commentary from The Verge. It says, part of the problem is linked to Hertz's plan to rent EVs to ride-hail drivers. Of the 100,000 Tesla acquired by Hertz, half were allocated to Uber drivers as part of the deal with the ride-hail company. And drivers said they love the Teslas, but Uber drivers also tend to drive their vehicles into the ground. By the way, this is Uber drivers outside of New York City. I mean, into the ground in New York City is a whole different ballgame, as everybody knows. So this high rate of utilization can lead to a lot of damage, certainly more than Hertz was anticipating. So again, when you combine the point we're making is that there should have been a discussion about all these technicalities before, you kind of incentivize someone to buy an EV without kind of having this education process about this. Okay. Then the New York Taxi Workers Alliance brought this case. And basically what the case was about was saying that it was less about the Green Rides Initiative. It was more about reinstituting the EV exemption without having a discussion, whether that was illegally done, whether that was inappropriately done. they were seeking a temporary restraining order from the New York State Supreme Court. It's called an Article 78, a TRO. That's what it's abbreviated to. And what that means is that they want an immediate stop to the policy because it can cause an immediate harm. Like if they, let's say you file a lawsuit, but it takes 3 months to get to the lawsuit. In those 3 months, if everybody knows this lawsuit is going on, they're just going to rush out to add all these plates, which kind of anyways happened. But in any case, that's what happened. TLC responded. Again, we're going to provide the links to all these articles. They gave this disclosure that 1,200 were already issued within the first 20 days. So that kind of implies that a ton of EV plates were, more new cars were going to come online. And they did disclose this. I want to be factual about this and be fair. Of the 1,200, they said 1,114 were individuals and 86 were from corporations. So, those were the facts that the TLC disclosed at that time. But why does this 86 even exist is the point. Like, why is one corporation, new plate getting to a corporation? In any case, then on November 8th, we're getting closer to the present day, they were granted the TRO, but so basically the judge, the Supreme, I'm not a legal expert, but basically our understanding of what happened is the Supreme Court judge saw the arguments of both sides, and they had to determine, was there immediate harm and should a TRO be granted while this was litigated. So the judge granted the TRO, but said, I guess the parties agreed that there were applications could be accepted till Monday. So just like what happened here, instead of a 2-week thing, it was like a 4 or 5 day heads up. But, if you know about the TLC industry, people move fast in the city. Drivers move fast. And so 5 days is plenty. And so, by the way, we provide the links to this. You can see all the, original documentation. We also wanted to say that in the court documents, and we'll get more clarity with this, but it sounds like the TLC officially has to respond by November 29th. And then a response to that has to be December 13th. So it kind of gives a timeline that I think this is just going to be determined in a few months. I don't think it's going to be like for years and years and years, or even more than 6 months, where a determination is going to be made. Then the Taxi Workers Alliance is going to hold a rally on November 15th. We'll cover that. That was also news. Okay, so this is the last article we did, and we'll conclude here. So TLC Plate Stampede, update on NYTWA's temporary restraining order, and TLC ethics. So we're not going to read this whole article, but basically the point we made here is that technically to submit an application, a driver or a fleet, a business in this case, because they can also apply for these plates, they need a VIN. And a VIN, people say VIN number sometimes, by the way, but the N in VIN stands for number. I, by the way, used to say that too, but now it's a kind of a pet peeve. But they need a VIN, and they need a base affirmation. A base affirmation is basically you have like a New York City base that associates with a specific VIN. And that's like reported to the TLC. So you need those two items, and you also need an insurance policy number. But technically, they shouldn't do this, but they will make up an insurance policy number and just after the fact say, will they change the policy number on me? But the VIN, you can't really mess up. I mean, if you go back and say, oh, I did a typo or something like that, I mean, I don't know about that. The other thing that's worth mentioning is that there's a $625 fee that's non-refundable, and the TLC makes that, exclamation point. All TLC fees are non-refundable, no exceptions, exclamation point there. So the TLC's made, a good amount. I'm not, 10,000, and so in any case, so there were rumors going around that we're going to put in 10,000 applications, before this was, a lot from a good friend, Tom Ford. He went to the Falchi building at the Uber NYC quote unquote green light hub and like, just look at the line. There are lines outside brokerages, brokers and things like that. And then, and we'll conclude here, we get some numbers on Friday. and the numbers are astonishing. So the TLC, based on the city reporting, the TLC said prior to the lawsuit, the TLC's been processing about 100 to 150 applications a day, which is also kind of just crazy if you just compound that over a few months. And then it says, according to the commission spokesperson, Jason Kirsten, that number has since ballooned, with the TLC receiving a total of 5,943 applications between Wednesday and Friday. So you have to add 5,943 plus 1746, and that was noon Friday, and the deadline for the TRO is Monday. So that 10,000 application threshold that many people wanted to break, I think that's going to get broken. So it kind of defeats the purpose of the TRO almost. But that is what it is. That can be litigated. But that's where we're at right now. And so we'll provide the links to everything. After this, we're going to make a table of contents. So if you want to skip around this, I know it's a little bit long, but this is such a consequential moment for this industry. Sometimes it's just worth talking about this at a little bit of length. So apologies for making this long, but we just think it's really important. And so we'll add the podcast at the back half of this. That was published on November 4th. We'll keep you up to date. We'll keep on writing on our in the newsletter. Thanks for listening. Appreciate the time, and we'll keep you up to date.
Welcome to the NYC Taxi News Podcast. This is Abe, and I'm here with Carolyn and Dawood and Nancy Reynoso. Has been invited, and she's been here before, and we enjoy having her here. Okay, today we'll be discussing the recent surprising, some would say shocking, change to the FHV cap. Before we get into that little background, Carolyn, you want to take over?
Okay. After years of ever-increasing numbers of FHVs flooding New York City streets, and after a failed attempt in 2015, the New York City Council finally passed legislation in 2018 to institute a cap on FHVs. There was an exception to the cap for wheelchair-accessible vehicles and electric vehicles until the EV exemption was eliminated. That exemption has now been brought back. In other words, unlimited Uber-Lyft vehicles as long as they're EVs or waves. According to the latest figures on the TLC website, there are 100,000 currently licensed FHVs. There are 8,700 currently licensed yellow taxis. Unfortunately, there are only 730,000 trips a day, which indicates a tremendous oversupply of vehicles. The TLC knows this, so why would they lift the cap? No taxi or for-hire business can sustain itself on 7 trips per car per day. It should be noted that the TLC never mentioned anything about lifting the cap at various city council and taxi and limousine commission hearings, nor even on October 18th at 10 a.m. when the TLC voted on the Green Rides initiative that requires all Uber-Lyft rides to be in EVs or waves by 2030. This major policy change, which should have been debated, was not revealed until 4 p.m. on October 18th during a press conference on the Green Rides initiative. The required yearly TLC report they are basing the policy change on is the FHV License Review Report and Determination. This report, mysteriously, was done in February 23, but not released publicly until October 18th, 8 months later. I'm surprised they left in several inconvenient facts in the report, such as in January 2023, 21% of FHVs did not perform a single trip. Obvious question, why are you adding vehicles? When Commissioner Doe was asked on New York One why he was adding vehicles, he responded by saying that the need was in the outer boroughs. The report contradicts this in that it states, quote, outer borough service has not been an issue, unquote. None of this bodes well for the industry, including drivers of all sectors. Remember that the last time TLC opened up FHV licensing for 1,000 new EV plates, that 100,000 drivers tried to sign up. That's all I have to say.
Let me be the first to speak. I just want to say this. When the Hass Act was passed in 1937, I think 1936. Okay, and that created the medallion system. There was 15,000 medallions, I think. Okay, now this was going to be for all four boroughs that use the taxis. You know, Staten Island is a, sort of off. They don't have too many taxi hails as Staten Island. Okay, and at that time, not everybody could make a dollar because there were actually too many taxis, and it was reduced to 11,000 after many turned in their license saying we can't make any money. Okay, and the 11,000 medallion taxis, which was until the early 2000s or late 1990s when they started to issue more, remained at 11,700. So actually, what they're saying is now is why are they putting cars on the road, which many are bound to not make any money. Okay. And I turn it over to Dawood. Let's start with Dawood, and then Nancy, you can follow.
I think there's just so much to say about this. I think Carolyn and all of you are summarizing it well, and I'm sure Nancy will as well. I think just in terms of that article that I wrote for AutoMarketplace, the Dawood Taxis Drop Dead, I've been speaking to a lot. I want to say I've spoken to 10 to 15 different people in the tax medallion industry, from people who are some of the largest brokers to some of drivers. And the thing that I think one thing that should be said is that because it's an illiquid market, the price right now, and I think Carolyn mentioned this offline, it might be transacting at 110 or 120. But if you have a bit of a financial markets mind, like with my background is once these initial deals are done, it's gonna if this policy isn't reversed, it'll probably crash. A better way to think about this: if Marblegate's listing was on the stock market, and then this news came out, how much would the stock drop by? And that would be indicative of how much a medallion is worth. Now, I don't think medallions are going to zero or anything like that, but there's a few things, and I'll turn over to Nancy and we'll talk about it later, that confuse the heck out of me related to this. One is that there's a city loan guarantee on 3,000 to 5,000 medallions. So I don't understand the math behind doing this and its impact on medallion valuations. And I know Marblegate must be fuming about this because I think this blew up their stock listing. And Marblegate kind of came with the city in good faith to make that debt restructuring deal occur. That was a very hard deal to occur. The second thing is a lot of these EVs don't even you can't even get physical damage insurance with these EVs. And I've had people who've called me who have asked for my advice, and they're like, yeah, we just are buying this EV because we want the TLC plate. We don't really believe in EVs. And it's basically causing a lot of these guys to enter into debt. Let's say a Tesla Model Y is 40 or 50,000 at interest rates at 8 or 10%. That's about $800 or $900 a month. Someone hits that. It's a total potential mini financial disaster happening because they're being forced to buy cars to get the quote unquote TLC plate. And then the third thing I'll say is that I think the politics of this has rapidly changed with what happened to Eric Adams with that investigation. And I think there's a lot of chatter in the FHV industry. This is not even hyperbole. People are furious with this decision, furious. And I think, they're trying to say, okay, if Adams took money from this Turkish, I don't know speak out of turn, but something like that, or whatever the inappropriate, right? Now they're saying that, well, and I'm not saying that, Revel is playing the politics it needs to play, but a big name that needs to be discussed is what's Revel's role in all of this? Because why was that guy at the press conference? Like, this is like Banana Republic press conferences going on, at City Hall. So I'll leave it there. I know that was kind of a rant, but I'll hand it over to Nancy. But I think those three topics are pretty interesting from my perspective.
Oh, wow.
Nancy, you're on.
Well, this was like Carolyn explained in the beginning, very surpriseful. Thank you, Caroline, for all this investigation and you mentioning. I would have never known that they did something about it back in February and they didn't let anybody know about the reports till 8 months later, you said?
Yep.
Wow.
Day of the press conference. Right. They had ample opportunities to bring it up, but they never did.
Yeah, they've probably been doing more than that under the table here. And I'm just surprised that they would take this initiative. Well, nothing surprises me with TLC anymore after what they did with taking the borough taxi name and putting them on black cars. So nothing surprises me anymore. I didn't think they would do something like this. So they're basically like they found a loophole. They made their own little loophole to give more plates out, I guess. But they're saying they're for EVs. So, I mean, it just contradicts the point of how much saturation of vehicles we've had for a number of years already. And I've heard from the industry and the guys that my husband knows, because my husband just drives for these big app companies. He doesn't do car service. He does just Uber and Lyft. And when he talks to his friends, that a lot of them are in between Uber and Lyft and car services, so some of them are just car services, they're all talking and gloriously happy and jumping. Oh, I'm going to go get my plate. I'm going to go get my plate, and I'm going to get my car. But like your other guest was just saying, it's also putting drivers in this big, like, financial despair because these cars, they're not affordable. And by what I know, maybe they're making them cheaper now, that the batteries to these cars are in the thousands when they go. So I'm just saying, and I also had heard not too long ago, just how we all know that the Brooklyn-Queens Expressway is going through a lot of infrastructure troubles right now, because I think that the bottom or something, one of them is not stably well, and the city knows it. They're trying to work on it. I hear these cars are much more heavier than a traditional gas car. So, I mean, if you're going to start saturating the city with more FHVs that are electric, that are much more heavier than a regular car and causing much more congestion, because all these people are running now to get these cars. Another thing that worries me, too, is this whole craziness that's always been around with the leasing companies. Like, one of the most popular ones that gives a lot of cars to the guys in the Bronx is City Livery Leasing, and these guys have had big problems with drivers because drivers finish paying off the cars, but for some weird reason they don't get the plate. And that's a whole show we can do on that. They don't get the plate. Like, they got to keep paying the dealer for the plate. And these guys get to have like hundreds or thousands of plates under their names. Why does this even happen? There's so many things I would love to get down to the bottom of, and I can't. But yeah, that's just about it. And I'm just very shocked to hear that they would do this like this. Another little sneaky one, throw it out just like that after they probably planned it all these months, and they just like Carolyn said, just let it out in October. I'm against it. I'm definitely against it. Because there's so many as there is. Now we're going to have some more.
Can I add one more thing to that?
Sure.
Congestion pricing fees are supposed to be determined this month by the TMRB, Transportation Mobility Review Board. That's the group of people, including Kathy Wild and an ex-deputy mayor, Carl Weisbrod, and John Samuelson from the Transit Workers Union. They're supposed to sit down and decide what the pricing is going to be on the different types of vehicles, including taxis and FHVs. So you have that looming on top of all this. what did they know about this? I bet they did. I would guess that they might have known about this. And just off the top of my head, like what Nancy is bringing out is that, again, there was no debate about any of this, not the numbers of vehicles or the types of vehicles. And just off the top of my head, what are some of the downside of EVs besides the weight, which is terrible? There's the particulate matter that gets, that comes from the brake pads, the ground-up road bed, the tires. There's the fires. There's the time to charge.
Can I interrupt you real quick? I'm sorry, Caroline. Yes.
Yeah, sure.
The fires. I heard firemen say they don't want to get close to a Tesla when it's burning because the battery pack is actually on the floor, and they're very easy to go up in flames when there's collisions. And I heard that firemen already don't want to get close to Teslas. I've seen a couple of Teslas burning in the highways upstate when they get in a collision. Very easy to grab collision, quick and fast because of the gas.
Especially in a densely populated city like New York. I mean, if you've ever driven around Texas, you could go hours in some places and never even see another car. It's actually very nice for a New Yorker. It's a great feeling. So, okay, if your Tesla, or whatever, blew up in the middle of nowhere, it might be a problem for you, but you're not going to take 100 other people with you. In New York City, I mean, it would be an absolute disaster if one of these cars goes on fire in a tunnel or on a bridge. There's also, besides the charging problem, the time, there's insufficient electrical grid to service all these numbers of cars. And then there's the pollution caused by the production, of the various minerals. I think it takes 6 times the amount of minerals to produce an EV. I mean, and plus a lot of these plants that are producing parts and refining minerals and all that, the electricity they use comes from coal-fired plants. I mean, they keep saying they're doing this to help New York City's climate. I mean, this isn't going to do anything for New York City's climate. That's ridiculous.
No.
And I mean, it might even be a good goal for the future, but you have to think about all these things before you just rush in and do it. And I think the reason they're doing it is because they want more charging stations, and there isn't enough demand for the charging stations. So this way, there's sort of this automatic demand that they think they're going to produce by putting all these EVs on the road.
And I think just to put on the, there's definitely federal money that they want involved. I think this is where a weird argument is being made. And I want to also address one thing Nancy said about the leasing companies, because I actually know a lot about that, so it'll be helpful for the viewers, is that we can electrify the fleet, but why does that necessarily mean we need to add more cars? Like, those are not two mutually exclusive. You can there's 4,500 medallions. We're not electrify them. Fine. If that's the goal, electrify them. Tell the medallion owners, tell Revel to buy medallions and electrify them. No problem, zero issue. The issue, why do we have to, it's kind of like the only way to electrify is to add more cars. That doesn't make, like, why is that the only way? Concentrate on the existing fleet. In terms of what Nancy said on those leasing companies, I do know a lot about that industry. So what's basically occurred, once they did the TLC Plate Cap, basically there were these basically 4 large leasing companies. There are now 3: American Lease. They call them the Leasing Mafia. I wrote an article about it, but it's American Lease, Tower, Buggy, Fast Track is now part of Tower. And so and David Doe also mentions this. So Nancy, that point you made is really important. He keeps on saying that predatory leasing companies, it allows for a driver to get out of a predatory lease. Okay, so what are the stats on that? Out of the roughly 100,000 TLC plates that are out there, 70% roughly are driver claimed, like the driver of the car claims the plate. So that's about 25 to 30,000 are owned by these leasing companies, but really about half of that is owned by these big leasing companies. So there are different ways to approach that problem. One way is to have just like the tax medallion industry has a lease cap. That's how they solve that problem. Correct me if I'm wrong, Abe and Carolyn. Doesn't the medallion industry have a lease cap?
Yes.
So that's a very, and that's why the NYTWA has called for that. So That's a very obvious and easy way to say, hey, leasing company, if you're being predatory, you can't charge us more, like literally copy and paste the medallion regulations, you solve for that. So that's one way to do it. The other thing I'm not against, by the way, is if they want to release 500 plates a year to individual drivers who are stuck in leasing arrangements, no problem. The issue I have with this policy as well is why can Hertz and Revel add more plates? That's crazy. That's what's making me more nervous than the individual drivers. The individual drivers might add 1, 2, 3,000 plates. That's still bad. Not end of the world bad, still bad. But if you get Hertz and Revel the ability to add thousands of plates overnight, that's very nerve-wracking, because they have a lot of financial clout. In terms of the other issues with EVs, just financially speaking, the people who are going to be the least, the most financially sophisticated people are the insurance companies. The reason why insurance companies do not insure Teslas or EVs is exactly to what everybody's saying. These cars are there's not a third-party network. I know a lot of auto repair guys, like they have to retrain the technicians, refit the facilities, otherwise they risk like electrocution and stuff like that. Now, all of this is going to come. Electric vehicles are likely the future, but this is not an on-off switch kind of thing. Even Elon Musk says it will take 20 years to do this transition. Elon Musk himself says that. And so I think, without going on too long here, is that I think what it ultimately comes down to is there's politics involved in this decision, because I think we can say all the logical things and it'll make total sense, but then David Doe will go on New York One and say, well, people are stuck in leasing companies, but this like some nonsense stuff that doesn't make any sense. And so in my article, we had David Doe on. He's a nice enough guy on a personal level, but frankly speaking, I think with this decision, he's left people no choice in this industry. He's lost all credibility, and I believe he must resign from the TLC chair. He cannot be trusted with the management of this industry anymore, in my opinion.
A good opinion. Let me say two things. Number one, about insurance, collision insurance. There has never been a company that I'm aware of that sells collision insurance to yellow taxis. Okay? So why all of a sudden do these people...
No, there is. There are.
Well, I never was able to buy it.
It's called Kingstone. So the big collision and comp companies, there's only a few, just like there's only a few liability-only companies. American Transit, Hertz, everybody knows these names. And then there's Kingstone, and then there's Adriatic. So these companies do underwrite for hire vehicles, I believe, including yellow cabs, comp, and collision.
I have always been told that there is no company that will sell collision insurance on a yellow taxi. I've always been told that over my many years being a medallion owner.
But are you saying that based on? Are you saying that someone told? Like I talked to the insurance company.
Yeah, American Transit.
I myself have.
Sure.
Well, American Transit is like a illiquid. I mean, there's a whole story behind American Transit, like in terms of liquidity and stuff like that. But right now, there's a publicly listed company called Kingstone, and it's publicly listed, so it's not like, shady or anything like that. They specialize in comprehensive income. I just want to make that point because this is why it's important, Abe, to make that point. If someone has a loan on a car, they need comp and collision by the lender.
Oh, well, we used to borrow from our credit unions, which no longer exist for the taxis. The money that was owed was not owed to the dealer, the car dealer. It was always owed.
What's different in this case is, let's say you go to Tesla, right? And Tesla doesn't have a financing. Let's say they do something with U.S. Bank. That's like one of their main lenders, or Bank of America. Now, what these drivers are doing is, if you go to Tesla and say, I want to use this car for Uber and Lyft in New York City, they will say, get the hell out of this dealership. We're not interested in you. Because they don't want to underwrite. Right. They're not going to give a loan for that. So what they do
Of course.
is they say, right? This is where issues occur, and this is where people get into trouble. They get normal, quote unquote, DMV insurance, and normal, quote unquote, insurance includes comp and collision usually. Like that's like a normal idea of insurance, auto insurance. Most people opt in, especially in New York State, for comp and collision. What happens is they get that, then they cancel it, then they get the TLC plate, and they don't update the bank. These banks are getting more intelligent on this. And so what can happen is a year later, two things can happen. One is the bank checks in again a year later saying, hey, can you send me your insurance documents, or they have a database? If these guys cannot show that they have comp and collision, the bank will be like, you must immediately pay off the loan or return the car or something like that. That's what they'll say, because you've broken the financial agreement. Now, before, you could say that, well, I can get comp and if there's not even a product that you can buy, that's a totally different issue. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, let's say a driver's like, okay, I'll buy comp and collision because my bank is saying that. If there's not a product in the marketplace to get comp and collision, you're going to default on your loan.
Well, you'll default on your loan if you get into an accident and you don't have the money to pay for the car.
Exactly. And the reason my DNA in this industry is I was in the Uber Black side. So I ran BMWs and everything. I can tell you so many different collision, flooding, all of these different type of stories about what happens to these drivers. If I was not there, these guys would go bankrupt. They would be bankrupt. They do not have the money. And so I was talking to a gentleman yesterday, and I said, listen, you're going to buy the Tesla Model Y, da-da-da-da-da. He's gone to 2 comp and collision accidents this year. Not his fault, by the way. Someone rear-ended him, so it wasn't his fault. In both those instances, he had video, he could prove it. It still took 4 to 5 weeks to resolve the issue when he wasn't at fault. Mm-hmm. So what I'm saying is that for the comp and collision thing, when in the yellow cab industry historically, the credit union, it was such a niche industry. So let's say Melrose, they knew the taxi industry. They will say that, okay, we're going to underwriting this. Everybody's eyes are wide open. Does that make sense? Like, you're not lying to anybody. Melrose knows why you're getting the loan to buy a taxi. Like, everybody is understanding why everybody's getting the loan and everything. This is different. Right. This is like Bank of America thinking a guy is getting a Tesla to use in like just New York City for personal use. And then a year later, they're like, what? He was using it for like Uber, like in New York City? What was that about? That's not that we wouldn't approve the loan.
So if you go to buy an electric car, you go out of the city somewhere where they're not going to question what you're doing, then you're taking a chance with them, okay? Or they're taking the chance. The dealer's taking the chance.
Dealers dealers are corrupt because the way they sell a loan and then they package it to Wall Street. So the only thing most dealers and auto are incentivized to do is originate a loan, and then that risk is not with them anymore. So they even the salesperson, he just wants to make the sale. I had a guy from a Cadillac dealership in Long Island who I bought a Cadillac from years ago call me. He's like, what happened in New York City, buddy? And I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, we had like 15 Chevy Bolt, because, you know, GM owns Cadillac, so there's a Chevy arm to his dealership. He's like, all these guys from New York City just came and cleared out all the lot of Chevy Bolts, right? So he called me and being like, what happened in New York City? Like, what, did something happen? And I'm like, oh, no, it makes sense. They're getting electric vehicles and all of that stuff. And then I'll just say one last thing. Hertz, there's a very recent thing. We're writing an article about it. I can't even make this up. This is the headline of the article. Hertz is scaling back its EV ambitions because its Teslas keep getting damaged. I can't even make this up. This is a recent article. And this is specifically Hertz. We can all agree that Hertz, in terms of expertise with rental cars, are they're experts. I think that's not a controversial statement. Part of the problem is linked to Hertz's plan to rent EVs to ride-hail drivers. It says Hertz said it tried to mitigate, quotes, higher incidence of damage among EV rideshare drivers by siphoning some of its fleet into the leisure segment. So what I'm saying is that anybody, at the end of the day, my background is in finance, is in cars, I know how all of insurance, people are entering into financial deals, number one, by lying to get a loan, which is illegal, which is very different from what you did, Abe. You went to your credit union saying, I need a loan to buy a yellow cab. Everybody understands what's happening. This is totally different.
I just want to say, on Nancy will be you next, okay? I just want to say that on some of the accidents that I've been not personally involved in, but the car that I owned was involved in. If in fact that we knew that the other car was the one at fault, okay, we would take pictures of the car, make out a report, okay, and immediately have the cash ready to fix the car, okay, and then would go directly to the other car's insurance and file a claim. And we always got our money, okay? It was never a problem if you could take your pictures and have everybody agree that it was not their fault or is their fault. Okay. Now, if you had an accident that they might say, well, it was your fault, that probably they wouldn't compensate you. You just have to eat the price of fixing the car, okay, or borrow more money, okay, to fix the car, okay. I mean, it was a game with the credit unions. The credit unions were always willing to lend you money as long as the value of the medallion would cover it. Okay, and the medallion kept going up every year. For 70 years. Okay, so if you needed more money, they were there to give it to you. All right. One other thing I want to say, and Nancy, you're going to go next after this. All right. If I'm driving a car, a taxi, whether it be with gasoline or electric, right, and I'm not having a great day, right, but I'm saying to myself, gee, I need just one more fare and I'll be happy. Okay? And I look down and I say, well, I got enough gas, and if I run out of gas, there's always a gas station nearby. I can always go over with, and get some gas or put it in a container or something. What do these electric cars do when they run out of juice and they're in the middle of nowhere? Okay, they're going to have to get tow trucks to juice up that car again, right?
I think it's a big. There's a lot of big business opportunities in this EV thing that I'm very excited by. So that is definitely one of the opportunities there. So I agree with what you're saying.
You don't want to turn down the fare because this fare will give me a positive day. It'll make me feel like I had a good day. All right. And you take a chance. Okay. Especially if you go out of town. What if you're in New Jersey, and you run out of juice in that car? I wouldn't want to drive a car, unless, there's ways to get out of that situation. Okay.
Can I say something, Abe?
No, Nancy's next.
I'm sorry.
Nancy, go ahead. Nancy, you go next. And Carolyn, write down what you want to say, Carolyn. Okay.
Okay.
Oh, my goodness. This your guest. I'm sorry. I keep forgetting his name.
Trying to be a director. I can't help it. Okay.
Nancy, Dawood.
Okay, you have such great information, such great knowledge. You guys are amazing. Wow. I'm still, I mean, all the points you have given, like, they're right on check. Like I said, I'm still debating this. I'm like, how they're going to open up plates supposedly just for EVs? No, we're going to get super flooded again. And what's going to come behind that, and the financial aspects, and and the cars, and I thought about that too. With insurance, I mean, insurance will cover these cars easily. How is it going to go? They need full cover for the bank. It's a lot, and you probably have more knowledge about it. But I think it's a whole big mismatch, and it's a big mess, and they shouldn't have done this. This is what I got to say now.
Okay, Carolyn, your turn.
Okay, one quick thing about insurance, and then I have something else I want to add. I'm positive that Uber is having meetings with insurance regulators. I'm sure they are. They know, they understand this. They know this, that something is going to be worked out at some point that will help them. Also, I think I have to say that none of this would be happening if not for huge federal and state subsidies to make this electric transition happen. What happens if there's regime change in Washington or in Albany, which there may be? What happens to all these programs? They could just, go away, and then you're just, left with your half-built charging station and your EV that you can't get insurance on, and, who knows? And then there's a lot of other things looming in the future. For instance, there's a bill floating around the city council to issue licenses for electric carriages, 68 of them to start, which would replace the horse carriages in Central Park. So why would that be a problem for taxis? Because they're not just going to be relegated to Central Park. They're going to be roaming around Manhattan, theaters, stores, restaurants. They're going to be everywhere. So that's direct competition for taxis. Also the curb. There's all kinds of plans that have, been kicking around for years now about how to manage the curb. The future's not going to be yellow cabs just driving around looking for fares and parking wherever they want. Everybody's going to be relegated to a particular spot to wait or park or pick up passengers. That's their dream. And then you have the van legislation that's possibly going to come to pass, whereby they will allow vans to pick up passengers by handhails, which is a direct violation of the rules for medallions. Now, you might say, they're just, in the middle of nowhere in Brooklyn. Who can? It doesn't say in the legislation that they're only going to be in Brooklyn. Theoretically, they could be everywhere. They could be going, down Fifth Avenue and up Madison. Who knows? As we've seen from October 18th, they can do whatever they want, and nobody checks the TLC. They're just law unto themselves. And they didn't have much credibility. I would say now they have none. Now, medallion owners frequently think the TLC is stupid, or the city government or the mayor or the city council, that they're stupid, or no, they're corrupt. Maybe it's a little bit of each. But I think more basically what you see unfolding is the plan. This isn't happening by accident. I think they want to make New York City, Manhattan, south of 60th for now, maybe it'll be 96 later on, a playground for 30-year-old tech bros who work for tech companies. Somebody posted a map on Twitter the other day showing where all the tech companies are below 60th Street in Manhattan. They're everywhere. So they'll just be in their $5,000 a month studios, getting around on Ubers and electric scooters and electric city bikes, going back and forth to their tech jobs. And that's, sitting in their apartments, having everything delivered. And that's the future that's being foreseen. And I don't know if there's a place for yellow cabs within that, except there's, another arm of Uber, I guess, is what's happening. Anyway, it's not a very nice picture for the future.
What's happening with the medallions? Are the medallions in grave trouble, or are they going to rebound at this point?
Okay. This is my. I ran into a very prominent medallion broker who was very upset at me. Actually, she's like, I agree with all of your articles, but why did you say the medallion price has crashed 40-50%? What was that about? So she was like, I agree with everything you said except that point. And this is why I made the point, and I'm making the noise now, is that if you leave this EVs are getting cheaper, EVs are getting more affordable. There's more used EVs. I don't think there's an argument like, oh, we have to prevent EVs. I'm not trying to go along there. Let's get back to the first principles. I'll ask all of you, why is a taxi medallion worth X amount of dollars, right? It's a few things. The driver earnings potential, and then also the perceived scarcity value of a medallion. Those are the two main factors that drive a tax medallion. Now, there's two different types of investors. There's the driver investor. So that math is completely different. For the driver investor, they're like, well, if I lease a medallion and a car, it costs me right now for a 24/7 trip about $1,000 a week. So it's like a no-brainer to get a medallion if I want to stay in this industry, right? Or you're taking a view on the run rate of street hail as a percentage of market. So for the driver owner, I don't think it's the end of the world for the medallion. But for the investor class, for the people, and the investor class is important for the medallion industry because who's going to give the loans to medallion owners? Who's gonna, who's gonna buy medallions in fleets and like make a garage? And because there's some guys who are individual owner operators and some guys who cannot afford that financially but want to rent a medallion for an affordable price. And so why I say this is going to crash medallion is a good way to put it this way. So we all know that 4,500 taxi medallions are in storage, a little more than that. If I went to these medallion brokers and I said, if I needed to sell 4,500 medallions, how long would that take you? Do you see my point, what I'm trying to make? Where I'm like,
yeah, but
you need to understand what's the price, clearing price.
Let me say this. There are medallions that have been on the shelf for a long time now. Okay, many of them have come off the shelf. Okay, and it's just maybe that with everything that's been going on and the things in the city and whatever, that there's not a need anymore for 13,000 medallions. Okay.
If you add infinity cars, there won't be.
Yeah, well, why is a medallion a medallion? I mean, why? What powers does the yellow taxis have that the others don't?
I guess my point on this is that if the city wanted to kill the medallion or believe that's an outdated concept, they shouldn't have agreed to the debt restructuring and the city loan guarantee. By doing that, now all taxpayers are on the hook for between $300 and $500 million to make sure the medallion industry doesn't die. If they didn't do that debt restructuring deal, then it's this conceptual thing that, okay, is the medallion's time ended? Is this the best way to regulate the market? That's a fair discussion. But the city had agreed to, Marblegate probably owns 4,000 to 5,000 medallion loans. When I say city loan guarantee, that means the taxpayer money is now tied up in this. So if they agreed to do that, and then they make policy that destroys it, ultimately, if the concept like the city money is not coming from thin air, it's coming from taxpayer money. So now you're going to tell me that $300 million of our taxpayer money is going used to bail out the tax medallion industry when you agreed to the deal and then you were supposed to make policy to protect this guarantee? I'm not saying that we have to make the medallion worth $1 million again, but I guess my point is that you either do one thing or you do the other thing. This is insane policy where it's like, we're going to guarantee the medallion and we'll promise to protect it, but also we're going to destroy its value. You cannot do both things at the same time.
If they want to protect it, then they have to enforce the fact that we have an exclusionary zone.
Or give congestion, give like a congestion exemption.
When the green taxis came into being, they declared that the west side from 110th Street and from the east side, 96th Street down to the Battery, okay, is the exclusionary zone for the yellow taxis, that they are the only cabs that can pick up people on the street and the only cabs that can do radio calls. in that.
Well, I think
that area.
that is a debate to have, but I'll give you a perfect example. I'm not like there's two different things. If someone doesn't get their way and they're bitter about it, that's like tough luck, buddy. Like sometimes it goes your way, sometimes it doesn't. The argument I'm making here is that taxpayer money has been guaranteed to make sure this. We didn't make that decision; the city did.
Well, yeah. Well, I get what you're saying. When that the city has to protect us because they have no other choice unless if they want to eat that money. Okay.
Can I say something here? I think
go ahead, Carolyn. Go ahead. What?
You're thinking that your opponent, or in this case, the city, the mayor, the TLC, you're assuming that they will act rationally. They don't always act rationally. I mean, Medallion was a huge source of free money for the city, and they just threw that away. And I used to think that $300 to $500 million was a lot of money, but now I don't. We're going to be spending at least $12 billion on illegal immigrants.
But someone has to change. We as a country and a city will go bankrupt because we will devalue our currency. I mean, that's a whole different topic. Yes. But I'll give you a practical argument. In 2020, the city council, 49-0, created this TLC Office of Financial Stability. Every year, they were supposed to publish a report about the health of the medallion industry. Not one report, from my knowledge, at least public report, has been published. What is going on? They're required to publish those reports. And so my fear, this is why I think David Doe must resign, and you have to put a little bit of fear. What do politicians love? Politicians love to keep their positions. They're afraid of not being reelected. And so they have brought us to a point where, okay, we try to be nice. We had David Doe on the podcast. We directly asked him, why are there 4,500 medallions in storage? What is the plan? They went in front of city council. The default rate is 16%. And then you make this policy? Unacceptable. You have to get out of office if you give nonsense answers that don't make any sense. It's unacceptable. It's not. Then what's the point? What's the point of having a government if everybody is, not going to act rationally? This is a very different point than saying okay, I'm a Republican and a Democrat got voted and I don't agree with some of their policies. Money is involved in this, and taxpayer money is Republican, Democrat, Independent. And if they cost me and other New Yorkers $300 to $400 million, and by the way, I also have a genuine fear. One of these medallion guys like Doug Shifter or what happened, because Doe wasn't here when people were jumping into the river, when people were hanging themselves in the garage, right? What if that happens again? We're just going to let that happen? Like someone shooting themselves in the mouth in front of City Hall for the second time?
Well, they have an answer for that. Yeah. Their answer to that is, we need more mental health resources.
This is crazy.
Stupid answer that doesn't address the underlying issues. But have you taken a look at the city council recently? And what it's composed of? These are children who believe in magical thinking. I mean, they're not rational people.
What I'm saying and you guys are longtime New Yorkers, you've seen different governments and all of that stuff. I've seen different governments in New York State, is that at the end of the day, this is beyond the medallion, that's an element of it. The medallion value is down to this, right? That's one element of it. And okay, bad policy costing money. I swear, if there's a medallion owner who got his debt restructured, who just saw the light at the end of the tunnel and was promised that his investment would be safe, and then he sees this and he loses all hope and jumps into the river, which obviously no one should do that, and they should call the helplines and everything. I know the mentality, and I don't understand how they don't have that empathy. This is not a game. They're people will do this because people did this in the past. When Doe was the chairman of whatever, he wasn't even in the transportation industry till 2018 in Washington, D.C. I remember those suicides. I remember that hunger strike, right? And to do this 2 years later is insanity. It's absolute insanity for a photo op. And guess what? Adams did the photo op, right? And what do we find about Adams? He's taken money. Like his political. There's just like what happened to Cuomo. These guys think they're invincible, then they're not. Happened to Spitzer. These guys think they're invincible, then they're not. Happened to Sheldon Silver in the New York State Senate. The guy thinks they're invincible, then they're not. So it's either we have a city that the citizens speak up for and make noise before it's too late, or you're going to have 5 more Doug Shifters. And I don't want to report on Doug Shifter. I want to prevent Doug Shifter.
Mm-hmm. And let me just say one sentence, okay? I'm glad you're saying what you're saying, Howard, but the problem is that because they weren't here, the current administration wasn't here, they act like it never happened. Okay?
Yeah, but I'm not going to let those people's memory be insulted by this.
I know that, and I agree with you 100%. Okay? These people did give their lives for what was right. Right? Okay? They did. And believe me, I am struggling myself as a retired medallion owner. I managed to, pick myself up and do other things to support myself. But the money that I was supposed to have, with a paid off medallion, right? I never got. Okay.
And how many years did you drive the yellow cab? How many years did you drive the yellow cab?
42 years.
You drove the yellow cab before David Doe was even born, right? You put all those years of your life into this for him to blow up your life.
I drove the cab before Miradoshi was born also. I'd like to point that out.
Yeah, and it's not like
I think she ignored all of the cries. And you can go to NYC Taxi News and watch that meeting from 2017, okay, which I've put on the website so that people don't forget. Okay, just go to the front page.
I saw that, and it's. By the way, I saw that, and I genuinely, I was like, it was getting me upset when I was seeing that on NYC Taxi News, where I was like, oh my God, there's this guy from Punjab. I totally understand his story. He came from some small village in Punjab, India, with nothing in his pocket. Then he put his family through, and then they blew him up. This guy. Right. I totally understand his story. And then they blew up not only the immigrants, because I don't even think there's an immigrant versus non-immigrant thing.
Well, the point I'm making is they act now like none of this ever happened. Okay, but it did.
But we have to remind them. We have to remind them.
Well, that's why I left. That's why I've left that thing on NYC Taxi News. It's not going anywhere. It's going to stay there. Okay. Anybody who's interested, go to the front page, the homepage of NYC Taxi News, and read the meeting that was swept under the rug.
Yeah. Exactly. So I think the reason I'm being the thing is, like, a lot of people said, well, you're causing for the resignation of David Doe and everything. It's not because I don't think he's a good person. He's a nice enough person. But enough is enough. A statement has to be made to the Taxi Limousine Commission and the city. If you want to stab us, and when I say us, I'm not even a medallion owner. This just upsets me on principle, to tell you the truth, right? If they want to do this, right, people are going to fight back. People are going to fight back because too many people like yourself, Abe, like yourself, Nancy and Carolyn, who've been in the city, who've helped build this city, who've helped make it what it is. Everybody just can't lie down and tell the government's being irrational. It's like, no. It's like, if you make this decision, you're losing your chairmanship and your revolving door so you can become an adjunct professor at George Washington University or NYU. Enough of this nonsense. Enough of the revolving door. They have to have a bit of fear that if they make bad decisions, they're going to lose elections and they're going to lose their bureaucratic positions. They have to have that fear.
Okay. And on all these points that we're putting through now, I'm going to ask everybody to, if they have anything else to say it, and then we're going to end this very good podcast. Carolyn, you go first.
Yeah, I'd just like to say we're in the middle of an election. Early voting is going on now. The entire city council is up for re-election. And I've read that so far turnout has been fairly light. We'll have to see what happens on Tuesday when the real election takes place. But, some of these city council people are running unopposed, which I don't understand, but, there it is. The people who are in office, this didn't happen by accident. They were put in office by movers and shakers, like Bradley Tusk, for instance, who helped Uber gain prominence 8-10 years ago. He is a big contributor to 21 and 21, which was an organization that was created to help more women be elected to the city council. He's the person behind that. So these idiots that you see in the city council, they were put there on purpose because they don't know anything. They don't know what they're doing. They're just told what to do. They're given an agenda. They're given staff. They're given training. And, this is the result that you get. So I wish the world was as rational as Dawood thinks, but, it's just, it is from the standpoint of certain people in power behind the scenes, some of whom we don't even know who they are. We can guess. Probably the biggest one starts with a B, if you know who I mean, Bloomberg. But, I just, if turnout is light and there's no changes, in the legislature or, maybe the mayor will have to resign. There would have to be a special election. And until that time, Jumaane Williams becomes the mayor. And people to the left of Adams are challenging him for the mayoralty. They think he's too liberal. He's too conservative. It's all very strange, and I think New York City lost about 500,000 people over the last few years. Tax-paying people with money, which is bad. So what are we going to be left with in New York City? I don't even want to think about it. New York City came back once before. I hope by some miracle we can do it again, but I have my doubts. Take it away, Abe.
Nancy, you want to go?
Yeah. Well, I'm very honored to have been asked to be on this podcast today. You guys are all great with information. And like Carolyn was saying, I know this is not, we don't get into politics here, but the city council, I had told you, Abe, that I moved back into the city last week after 3 years out for many situations, and one of them is my mother is very ill in Manhattan. She refuses to leave her apartment, so I need to get closer. And, of course, my husband's still working in the city, so we're just going to get closer, stop the traveling. And also my job is now over in Westchester County, which is only 25 minutes from the Bronx versus 50 minutes from Orange County. So that's...
Yeah, you were living in Middletown, right?
I was living in Middletown, right off the Pine Bush exit, country.
Yeah, I know it well.
I'm back over here. And yes, and I'm looking at the situation in the city because I've always been a Democrat, and now I'm just like in a limbo. Like, should I go independent or not even vote? Because I just don't like what's happening in city council, the mindset that some of these people have. I'm just flabbergasted to see these ideas and these things they come up with, but that's a whole other thing. So, yeah, but yes, I think we should have another one of these where you're a great guest, Abe, and there's a lot to talk about and a lot to think.
I just want to say I'm not a Republican or a Democrat. I'm an American.
That's what I'm going to do. I'm just so done with politics.
Well, yeah, I think I just want to. My 2 cents is that the reason we have to speak about politics, I'm kind of your opinion, is just fundamentally this decision is a political decision that impacts our industry. Yeah. So then, we are forced to talk about that, And the only thing I'll say, and Abe, you'll have the last word. I already let me speak for so long. I appreciate that. My 1 minute conclusion here is that I am a bull on New York City. New York City is coming back. Too many people have come to the city. Too many people have built it. for it to be stripped away. And I have confidence that New Yorkers will stand up. I'm not saying we're going to win every single city council vote. I'm also I'll reveal it. The last election, I voted for 4 Democrats, 4 Republicans. My ballot was split. So I'm also not either a Democrat or Republican. I am, though, for people who understand working New Yorkers, who make policy that are also pro-business, should balance the pro-business with the working New Yorker. And I'll just conclude with this. That press conference, before Eric Adams had to turn around and rush back to, from Washington, D.C. because, quote unquote, nothing is wrong and everything is okay, but he's canceling all his meetings in the White House in Washington, D.C. Doesn't seem to be the case. But my point is this, is that if you're going to hold a press conference where Lyft, where that Julie Tigg or whatever her name is, right, is there, you're doing ribbon cutting ceremonies with a private corporation. If you expect no one to say anything, you're gonna have you're just gonna drive everyone away. No one will want to invest. No one will want to be here. But I'm a bull on New York City. New York City's coming back, and honestly, we'll deal with the politics, but someone has to say something. So I'm saying that, and that's what has to be said. And it has to be said, or they're just gonna take everything away, and then quietly.
Okay, here's my final word. Okay, Dawood, maybe you should run for mayor. Number 1.
No interest.
Okay.
No interest. Zero interest.
Okay, well, maybe you should be somewhere in city and not in the city council, but some kind of advisor to people in our industry. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Well, hopefully the newsletter is helping people at least understand what's going on.
Yeah. Okay. And that's it. We had a good show, and we'll come back in a few weeks and do another one. This is the beginning of November. Maybe we'll do one, a few weeks before Christmas, and see if we could, make Thanksgiving a thankful time. Thanks everyone
guys.
for listening. Thanks all you guys for participating. And if you want to be on this podcast, just send an email to NYC Taxi News at either AOL.com or gmail.com. Okay?
Thanks.
Bye, folks.
Okay.
Bye,
Thanks, guys.
everyone. Thank you.
Bye.